Carmen woke up at 4:30 in the morning, just like she had done every single day for the past 12 years. The small room above the kitchen was still dark, but her body knew it was time to start another day of work. She didn't need an alarm clock anymore. Her mind had learned to wake her up at exactly the right time. She put on her simple black dress and white apron, the same uniform she wore every day. Looking in the small mirror, she tied her long dark hair back into a neat bun. At 34 years old, Carmen looked older than her age. Working from dawn to night had left its mark on her face, but her eyes still held a gentle warmth that made people trust her. Immediately, the Rivera family owned the biggest house in the entire valley. Their mansion sat on top of a hill, surrounded by olive trees and vineyards that stretched as far as the eye could see. Carmen had been working for them since she was 22, desperate for any job that would help her send money back to her sick mother in the village. She remembered her first day clearly. Mrs. Rivera had looked her up and down like she was inspecting a piece of furniture. "You will clean, cook, and take care of whatever we need," she had said in a cold voice. "We don't tolerate laziness or mistakes. Do your job well, and you'll have a place here. Disappoint us, and you'll be gone by evening." Carmen had nodded, quickly, too grateful for the opportunity to say much. She needed this job more than anything in the world. Her mother needed medicine, and her younger brother was trying to finish school. Every peso Carmen earned went straight to her family, leaving her with just enough to buy basic necessities for herself. The first few years were the hardest. Mrs. Rivera never smiled at Carmen, never said please or thank you. She would leave lists of tasks that seemed impossible to finish in one day, then get angry if everything wasn't perfect. Mr. Rivera barely noticed Carmen existed. To him, she was just another piece of furniture that happened to move around and clean things. But Carmen learned to adapt. She discovered that if she worked extra hard and never complained, the family would leave her alone. She found out Mrs. Rivera's favorite foods and learned to cook them exactly the way she liked. She memorized Mr. Rivera's schedule so his coffee would be ready the moment he walked into the kitchen. She became invisible in the best possible way. When Mrs. Rivera caught a terrible fever one winter, Carmen didn't hesitate to help. She stayed up all night bringing cool cloths for her forehead and making special soups to help her get better. For 3 weeks, Carmen barely slept, taking care of the sick woman like she was her own family member. Mrs. Rivera recovered completely, but she never thanked Carmen for the extra care. The next week, she was back to her usual cold behavior, acting like nothing special had happened. Carmen felt hurt at first, but she told herself that this was just how rich people behaved. Maybe they showed gratitude differently than poor people did. Their teenage son Diego was struggling with his math homework. Carmen had always been good with numbers, so she quietly started helping him after finishing her evening chores. She would sit with him at the kitchen table, patiently explaining problems until he understood them. His grades improved dramatically, and his parents were pleased. But they never asked who had been helping him. Carmen convinced herself that she was part of something important. The Rivera family had influence in the town. Mr. Rivera owned several businesses and employed dozens of people. Mrs. Rivera organized charity events for the church. They were respected members of the community, and Carmen felt proud to work for such an important family. She lived simply in her small room, saving every coin she could. Her mother's health had improved thanks to the medicine Carmen could afford to buy. Her brother had finished school and found a good job in the city. Carmen's sacrifice was paying off, and that made all the long days worth it. The other servants in the neighborhood sometimes complained about their employers, but Carmen always defended the Riveras. "They give me steady work," she would say. "They pay me on time every month. Many people would be grateful for what I have." Deep down, Carmen hoped that her loyalty would be rewarded someday. Maybe Mrs. Rivera would eventually treat her with kindness. Maybe they would give her a small bonus for all her years of faithful service. Maybe they would even help her when she got too old to work as hard as she did now. Carmen had created a world where she measured her worth by how well she served others. She took pride in keeping the house spotless, in preparing meals that made the family happy, in anticipating their needs before they even asked. Her entire identity had become wrapped up in being the perfect servant. She never asked for days off. Even when she felt sick, she never complained when they had dinner parties that kept her working until midnight. She never mentioned that her own room was cold in winter, because heating the servants' quarters wasn't a priority for the family. Carmen had learned to make herself small, to need very little, to find happiness in the satisfaction of a job well done. She believed that hard work and loyalty were the most important virtues a person could have. She was certain that good things came to people who served faithfully. even if those good things took a long time to arrive. Every morning, as she started her day in the quiet kitchen, Carmen felt grateful to have a purpose. She belonged somewhere, even if that place was in the background of other people's lives. She was needed, even if that need was never acknowledged out loud. This was her life, and she had accepted it completely. Carmen couldn't imagine wanting anything different, because she had never allowed herself to dream of anything else. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. Carmen was preparing breakfast when she heard Mrs. Rivera talking in the living room, her voice unusually serious. She caught bits of the conversation through the kitchen door. Someone had died in a car accident. There was a child involved. Business arrangements needed to be made. Carmen didn't think much about it at first. The Rivera family had many business connections, and she had learned not to pay attention to their private affairs. But everything changed when Mrs. Rivera walked into the kitchen with an expression Carmen had never seen before. "Carmen, we're going to have a house guest," Mrs. Rivera announced, her voice tight with annoyance. "A child. She'll be staying with us for a while until we figure out what to do with her." Carmen nodded, already mentally preparing a guest room. She assumed it would be the daughter of a family friend, maybe someone visiting for a few weeks during school holidays. "Her name is Lucia," Mrs. Rivera continued. "She's 8 years old, and her father just died. He was one of my husband's business partners. We're the only family she has left now." The way Mrs. Rivera said it made Carmen's heart sink. There was no warmth in her voice, no sadness for the child's loss. She spoke about Lucia like she was discussing an unwanted package that had been delivered to their door. Lucia arrived 3 days later in a car driven by a stern-looking lawyer. Carmen watched from the kitchen window as the small figure got out of the back seat. The little girl was tiny for her age, with dark curly hair and enormous brown eyes that seemed too big for her pale face. She carried a single small suitcase, and clutched a worn teddy bear against her chest. Carmen's heart broke instantly. The child looked lost and terrified, like a baby bird that had fallen from its nest. She wanted to run outside and scoop her up in a warm hug, but she knew her place. The Rivera family would handle the introductions. Mrs. Rivera met Lucia at the front door with the same cold politeness she showed to unwelcome guests. "You can put your things in the blue room upstairs," she said, not even bending down to the child's level. "Carmen will show you where everything is. Dinner is at 7 sharp. That was it. No welcome, no kind words about her father, no acknowledgement that this little girl's entire world had just been destroyed. Carmen watched Lucia follow Mrs. Rivera up the stairs, her small feet making barely any sound on the marble steps. Later that afternoon, Carmen knocked softly on Lucia's door. She found the child sitting on the edge of the large bed, still clutching her teddy bear. The room was beautiful but cold, decorated in shades of blue and white that made it feel more like a hotel than a child's bedroom. "Hello, sweetheart," Carmen said gently. "I'm Carmen. I work here in the house. Are you hungry? I could bring you something to eat." Lucia looked up with those enormous eyes but didn't speak. She just shook her head slightly and looked back down at her hands. Carmen's heart ached. She had never had children of her own, but every motherly instinct she possessed was screaming at her to comfort this frightened little girl. "Like some milk and cookies?" She tried again. "I just made some chocolate chip ones." This time, Lucia nodded just a tiny bit. Carmen smiled and hurried downstairs to prepare a plate. She arranged the cookies carefully and warmed the milk to just the right temperature, the way her own mother used to do for her when she was sad. When she returned, Lucia ate slowly and quietly. Carmen sat in the chair nearby, not wanting to overwhelm her but not wanting to leave her alone either. "Your teddy bear is very nice," she said softly. "What's his name?" "Pedro," Lucia whispered. It was the first word Carmen had heard her speak. "Pedro is a good name for a bear," Carmen replied. "He looks like he's been a good friend to you." Lucia nodded and hugged Pedro tighter. "My papa gave him to me," she said in a voice so quiet Carmen had to lean forward to hear her. Carmen felt tears prick her eyes. This poor baby had lost everything, and now she was stuck in a house where nobody seemed to care about her pain. The Rivera family had provided a room and food, but they were treating her like an obligation rather than a child who needed love and comfort. Over the next few days, Carmen watched how the family interacted with Lucia. Mr. Rivera barely acknowledged her existence, just nodding when she said good morning. Mrs. Rivera spoke to her only when necessary, giving instructions about mealtimes and house rules in the same tone she used with the gardener. Their son Diego, now in college, was home for spring break. He was polite to Lucia but distant, treating her like a temporary inconvenience that would eventually go away. Carmen found herself staying late after her work was done, just to spend time with Lucia. The child was clearly grieving but trying hard to be good and not cause any trouble. She ate her meals in silence, never asked for anything, and spent most of her time alone in her room. During one of these evening visits, Lucia finally started talking about her father. She told Carmen about their small apartment, about how her papa would read her stories before bed, about the special pancakes he made on Sunday mornings. Her voice was full of love and longing, and Carmen realized that this child had been truly cherished by her father. "Papa said I was his sunshine," Lucia whispered one night as Carmen tucked her into bed. "He said I made every day brighter just by smiling." Carmen had to excuse herself to cry in the hallway. How could the Rivera family be so cold to such a sweet, heartbroken child? How could they not see that Lucia needed kindness and attention, not just a roof over her head? She started bringing Lucia small gifts with her own money, a coloring book, and crayons, a children's storybook, a soft blanket for her bed. These tiny gestures seemed to mean the world to the little girl, who would smile for the first time each day when Carmen appeared. But Carmen began to notice something troubling. The Rivera family talked about Lucia when they thought she couldn't. Here, discussing her like she was a problem to be solved, rather than a child to be cared for. They mentioned boarding schools and distant relatives, always in terms of getting rid of their responsibility as quickly as possible. Carmen realized that Lucia had no idea she was unwanted. The child was trying so hard to be perfect, hoping that, if she was good enough, quiet enough, small enough, maybe she could stay in this house that felt nothing like a home. For the first time in 12 years, Carmen felt angry at the people she had served so faithfully. The dinner party that changed everything happened on a warm Saturday evening in May. Lucia had been living with the Rivera family for 2 months, and Carmen had grown to love the little girl like her own daughter. Every day she watched Lucia try harder and harder to make the family like her, not knowing that her efforts were pointless. Mrs. Rivera had invited 6 couples over for an elegant dinner to celebrate some business success. Carmen had spent the entire day preparing, cooking fancy dishes, and setting the table with the best china. She took pride in making sure everything was perfect, just like she always did. The guests arrived dressed in expensive clothes, talking loudly about their money and their travels. Carmen served the appetizers and wine, moving quietly around the dining room like she had done hundreds of times before. Rich people always talked, as if the servants were invisible, so she had learned to blend into the background. Lucia had been told to stay in her room during the party. Children should be seen and not heard, Mrs. Rivera had said that morning, and tonight, you shouldn't even be seen. Carmen had brought the little girl dinner on a tray and promised to check on her later. As Carmen served the main course, she heard one of the guests ask about Lucia. "So how long is the little orphan staying with you?" the woman asked, cutting into her steak. Carmen's hands froze for just a moment as she set down a plate. She had never heard anyone call Lucia an orphan before, and the word sounded harsh and cold. "Not much longer, thank goodness," Mrs. Rivera replied with a laugh that made Carmen's stomach turn. "We've been looking into boarding schools. There's one about 4 hours north that takes children in her situation." "Oh yes, I know that place," another guest chimed in. "It's very affordable. They're not fancy, but they get the job done. The children learn discipline and how to work hard." Carmen continued serving, but her ears were now completely focused on the conversation. She had heard whispers about that boarding school before. It was the kind of place where unwanted children were sent to be forgotten. "The poor thing lost her father so young," one of the wives said, though her tone suggested she didn't really feel sorry at all. "What a tragedy." "Well, these things happen," Mr. Rivera said, shrugging as he reached for more wine. "Her father should have planned better. He left us with quite a burden." Carmen nearly dropped the serving dish. Burden, they were calling sweet little Lucia a burden. "At least she's quiet," Mrs. Rivera continued. "Some children would be causing all sorts of problems by now. Crying, making demands, being difficult. This one just sits in her room like a mouse." The guests all laughed, and Carmen felt sick to her stomach. They were laughing about a grieving child who was trying desperately not to cause any trouble. "How long until you can send her away?" another man asked. "We're hoping to have her enrolled by the end of summer," Mr. Rivera replied. "The sooner the better. We never planned on becoming guardians, especially not to someone else's child." "Smart thinking," the first woman said. "Children are expensive, and this one isn't even family. Why should you sacrifice your lifestyle for someone who won't benefit you in any way?" Carmen stood frozen by the kitchen door, holding an empty serving tray. These people were talking about Lucia like she was a stray dog they had found, not a human child who had lost everything. The school will teach her practical skills, Mrs. Rivera explained. Cleaning, cooking, basic work that girls like her can do when they grow up. She'll never be educated enough for anything better anyway. Perfect, one of the men said. She'll learn her place in the world early. Better than filling her head with unrealistic dreams. Carmen felt something crack inside her chest. Lucia was incredibly smart. She had been teaching the little girl to read better in the evenings, and Lucia picked up everything so quickly. She asked thoughtful questions about the stories they read together. She drew beautiful pictures and made up creative games. This child could become anything she wanted to be, given the right chances. But the Rivera family had already decided that Lucia deserved nothing more than a life of serving others, just like Carmen. The best part, Mrs. Rivera continued, is that the school is far enough away that she won't be able to visit. Clean break. We can get back to our normal lives. Carmen's hands began to shake. She thought about Lucia upstairs, probably lying in bed hugging Pedro the teddy bear, not knowing that the people who were supposed to protect her were planning to throw her away like garbage. For 12 years, Carmen had listened to the Rivera family talk about their business deals, their social plans, their complaints about workers and neighbors. She had always told herself that rich people were just different, that they had different ways of showing kindness. But tonight, she finally saw the truth. These people had no kindness in them at all. They cared about nobody except themselves. All the years Carmen had spent serving them faithfully, believing that her hard work mattered, believing that they were good people who deserved her loyalty. She remembered staying up all night when Mrs. Rivera was sick, making special meals, helping Diego with his homework, never asking for thanks or recognition. She had given the best years of her life to this family, and they would discard her just as easily as they were planning to discard Lucia. Carmen quietly finished clearing the table, her mind racing. She brought coffee and dessert, smiled politely when the guests complimented the meal, and cleaned up after everyone went home. But inside, everything had changed. That night, after the house was quiet, Carmen went to check on Lucia. The little girl was awake, staring at the ceiling. Carmen, Lucia whispered, "Are you happy here?" The question hit Carmen like a punch to the stomach. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking at this innocent child who still believed that good people got rewarded for being good. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "I try so hard to be good," Lucia said, her voice small and sad. "But Mrs. Rivera never smiles at me. Mr. Rivera acts like I'm not even here. I thought if I was perfect, maybe they would love me like Papa did." Carmen's heart broke completely. She pulled Lucia into a gentle hug, feeling the little girl's thin shoulders shake as she tried not to cry. "Listen to me, Lucia," Carmen whispered. "You are perfect exactly as you are. If someone doesn't see how wonderful you are, that's their problem, not yours." As she held the crying child, Carmen finally understood something important. She had spent 12 years serving people who didn't deserve her loyalty. She had wasted her life making comfortable the lives of people who would never care about her comfort. But Lucia deserved better. And maybe, for the first time in her adult life, Carmen deserved better too. The good, obedient servant who had woken up that morning was gone forever. In her place was a woman who finally understood the difference between serving good people and serving selfish ones. Carmen knew that everything was about to change, and for the first time in 12 years, that didn't scare her. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early June. Carmen was dusting the living room when Mrs. Rivera tore open the envelope with excitement. She read it quickly, then smiled in a way that made Carmen's blood run cold. "Perfect," Mrs. Rivera said to her husband. "The boarding school has an opening. They can take Lucia next week." Mr. Rivera looked up from his newspaper. "That soon? I thought we had until the end of summer." "Another child cancelled last minute," Mrs. Rivera explained. "They want her there by Friday. We need to get her paperwork ready and pack her things." Carmen's hands trembled as she continued dusting the same spot over and over. Next week they were going to send sweet little Lucia away in just 5 days. "What about her schooling here?" Mr. Rivera asked. "Doesn't she need to finish the semester?" Mrs. Rivera waved her hand dismissively. "She's only 8. Missing a few weeks won't matter. Besides, the boarding school will catch her up on whatever she needs to know." Carmen knew that wasn't true. She had been helping Lucia with reading and math every evening. The little girl was smart and curious, always asking questions about everything. Sending her to that terrible place would waste all her potential. That afternoon, while the Rivera family went out for lunch, Carmen did something she had never done before. She went into Mr. Rivera's study and looked through the papers on his desk. Her heart pounded as she searched for information about the boarding school. She found the brochure buried under other documents. The pictures looked nice enough, but Carmen could read between the lines. The school was cheap because it provided minimal care. Children were expected to work for their meals and lodging. Education was basic at best. Most graduates ended up as servants or factory workers. This wasn't a school. It was a place where unwanted children were trained to accept lives of hardship and service. Carmen thought about her own childhood, how her parents had sacrificed everything to give her and her brother chances for better lives. Her brother had become an accountant in the city. Carmen had become a servant, but only because circumstances had forced her into it. Lucia deserved the same chances Carmen's brother had received. She deserved parents who would fight for her future, not people who wanted to throw her away. Evening. Carmen made her first small act of rebellion. When Mrs. Rivera asked her to start packing Lucia's belongings, Carmen said she would do it the next day instead. "I have too much cooking to finish tonight," she lied smoothly. "I'll take care of it tomorrow morning." Mrs. Rivera looked annoyed but didn't argue. Carmen had never given her a reason to doubt her word before. Instead of packing, Carmen spent the evening writing a letter. She wrote to her cousin Anna, who worked for a child protection agency in the capital city. Carmen had never contacted Anna about anything serious before, but she knew her cousin would help if she explained the situation. She described how the Rivera family treated Lucia, how they spoke about her, and how they were planning to abandon her at a substandard boarding school. She asked Anna what legal options might exist for protecting the child. The next morning, Carmen did something even bolder. She told Mrs. Rivera that she couldn't find Lucia's birth certificate, which was needed for the school enrollment. "What do you mean you can't find it?" Mrs. Rivera snapped. "I looked everywhere," Carmen said calmly. "Maybe it's in the safe, or perhaps the lawyer who brought Lucia still has it. I can call him if you'd like." Mrs. Rivera looked frustrated. "Fine, call him today. We don't have time for delays." Carmen called the lawyer's office, but instead of asking for the birth certificate, she asked questions about Lucia's legal status, who had official custody. What rights did the child have? Were there any relatives who should be contacted before making major decisions about her future? The lawyer seemed surprised by these questions. He admitted that the custody arrangements had been made quickly after Lucia's father died, and that proper procedures might not have been followed. "I should review the case more carefully," he said. "There might be legal requirements we've overlooked." Carmen felt a spark of hope. Maybe there were ways to protect Lucia that the Rivera family didn't know about. Her biggest act of defiance came on Thursday. Mrs. Rivera had scheduled an appointment to visit the boarding school the next day, planning to leave Lucia there immediately. Carmen waited until the family went to bed. Then she did something that would have terrified her just weeks earlier. She took the enrollment papers from Mr. Rivera's study and hid them in her room. The next morning was chaos. Mrs. Rivera couldn't find any of the documents needed to enroll Lucia. She accused Carmen of misplacing them, but Carmen acted just as confused and worried as everyone else. "I put everything on your husband's desk yesterday," Carmen said innocently. "Maybe they fell behind the furniture, or perhaps the wind blew them around when the windows were open." They spent 2 hours searching the entire house. By the time they were supposed to leave for the boarding school, it was too late to make the trip. Mrs. Rivera was furious. "This is completely unacceptable," she said. "We had everything arranged perfectly." "I'm so sorry," Carmen replied, though inside she felt triumphant. These things happen sometimes. Maybe it's a sign that we should double-check everything before making such an important decision. That afternoon, Carmen received a phone call that changed everything. It was her cousin Anna calling back about the letter. "Carmen, I've looked into this situation," Anna said urgently. "The family doesn't have proper legal custody of this child. The father's will named a different guardian, but somehow these people ended up with her instead." Carmen's heart started racing. "What does that mean?" "It means they have no legal right to make decisions about her education or future," Anna explained. "If they try to enroll her in that boarding school without proper custody papers, they could get in serious trouble." Carmen felt like she could barely breathe. "What should I do?" "I'm driving down there tomorrow," Anna said. "Don't let them take that child anywhere until I arrive. Can you manage that?" "Yes," Carmen said firmly. "I can manage that." That evening, Mrs. Rivera cornered Carmen in the kitchen. Her eyes were cold and suspicious. "I've been thinking about all these problems we've been having," she said slowly. "The missing documents, the confusion with appointments. You've been working here for 12 years without any issues. Now suddenly, everything is going wrong." Carmen kept her expression neutral, though her heart was pounding. "Sometimes things just happen. Mrs. Rivera. I'm trying my best to help solve these problems. Are you? Mrs. Rivera stepped closer, or are you causing them? Carmen looked directly into her employer's eyes for the first time in 12 years. I would never do anything to hurt this family, she said. It was true, in a way. She was trying to save Lucia, not hurt the Riveras. But Mrs. Rivera wasn't fooled. If I find out you're interfering with our plans for that child, you'll be out of this house so fast your head will spin. Do you understand me? Carmen nodded, but inside she felt something she had never experienced before. She wasn't afraid of Mrs. Rivera's threats anymore. She had found something more important than job security. I understand perfectly, Carmen replied. For the first time in her adult life, Carmen was choosing loyalty to what was right over loyalty to the people who paid her salary. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Tomorrow, Anna would arrive. Tomorrow, Lucia's real future would begin. And tomorrow, Carmen would discover what it felt like to fight for someone she loved, no matter what it cost her. Anna arrived at exactly 9 o'clock Friday morning, driving a small white car that looked official and serious. Carmen watched from the kitchen window as her cousin parked in the driveway, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of confident expression that came from knowing the law was on your side. Carmen had barely slept the night before. She knew that today would change everything, but she had made her choice. Lucia deserved a real chance at happiness, even if it meant Carmen would lose the only life she had known for 12 years. The Rivera family was having breakfast when Anna knocked on the front door. Carmen answered it, trying to look surprised to see her cousin. Anna, what are you doing here? Carmen asked, loud enough for the family to hear. I need to speak with the people caring for Lucia Rodriguez, Anna said in a clear, professional voice. I'm from the Department of Child Services, and we have some concerns about this child's legal situation. Mrs. Rivera appeared in the hallway, looking confused and annoyed. What is this about? Who are you? Anna introduced herself and explained that there had been irregularities in Lucia's custody arrangements. The child's father had named his sister as guardian in his will, but somehow Lucia had ended up with the Rivera family instead. That's impossible, Mr. Rivera said, joining the conversation. The lawyer handled everything properly. Anna opened her briefcase and pulled out official-looking documents. I'm afraid the lawyer made some serious mistakes. This family has no legal authority to make decisions about Lucia's future. In fact, keeping her here without proper custody could be considered unlawful detention. Carmen watched Mrs. Rivera's face turn pale. For the first time since Carmen had known her, the woman looked genuinely scared. We were just trying to help, Mrs. Rivera said quickly. The child had nowhere else to go. I understand your intentions were good, Anna replied diplomatically, but we need to correct this situation immediately. I'll need to take Lucia with me today so she can be placed with her proper guardian. Carmen felt her heart soar. Lucia would be saved, and it would all be legal and official. No one could argue with the government. But then Mrs. Rivera's expression changed from fear to suspicion. She looked directly at Carmen with narrowed eyes. This is very convenient timing, she said slowly. How did Child Services find out about Lucia so quickly? We've had her for months without any problems. Anna glanced at Carmen, then back at Mrs. Rivera. We received a report from someone concerned about the child's welfare. It's our job to investigate these situations. Who made this report? Mr. Rivera demanded. Carmen's stomach clenched. She knew she was about to be exposed, but she lifted her chin and met his gaze steadily. Anna checked her notes. The report came from Carmen Vasquez. She works in this household and was concerned about plans to send the child to an inappropriate boarding school. The silence that followed was deafening. Carmen could feel the Rivera family's anger burning through the air, like fire. You, Mrs. Rivera whispered, her voice shaking with rage. After everything we've done for you, 12 years of steady work, a roof over your head, money for your family, and this is how you repay us. Carmen found her voice, and it was stronger than she expected. I repaid you with 12 years of faithful service, but I couldn't watch you destroy an innocent child's life. You had no right, Mr. Rivera shouted. Lucia is our responsibility, not yours. You're just a servant. She's a human being, Carmen replied firmly, and someone needed to protect her. The next hour was a blur of angry voices and official procedures. Anna explained that Lucia's aunt had been searching for her for months, not knowing where she had ended up. The aunt was a teacher who lived in a nearby city, ready to provide Lucia with the love and education she deserved. When Anna went upstairs to get Lucia, Carmen followed. The little girl was confused but excited when she learned she had an aunt who wanted her. Will I still see you, Carmen? Lucia asked, hugging her teddy bear Pedro. I hope so, sweetheart, Carmen said, kneeling down to hug her. Your aunt seems very nice. I think you're going to be very happy. Will you be happy too? Lucia asked with the innocent wisdom that only children possess. Carmen smiled through her tears. Yes, I think I will be. After Ana and Lucia left, confrontation Carmen had been dreading finally came. Mrs. Rivera stood in the kitchen doorway, her face twisted with fury. Pack your things and get out, she said coldly. You're fired. Don't expect any references. Don't expect any final pay. And don't expect to find work anywhere in this region. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Carmen nodded calmly. She had expected this, and somehow it didn't frighten her as much as she thought it would. I understand, she said. I'll be gone within the hour. Carmen packed her few belongings into 2 small suitcases as she prepared to leave the room that had been her home for 12 years. She felt something unexpected. Instead of fear or sadness, she felt relief. The next few months were the hardest of Carmen's life. True to her word, Mrs. Rivera had spread stories about Carmen's betrayal throughout the community. Finding work was nearly impossible. Carmen had to take odd jobs cleaning houses for people who paid poorly and treated her badly. She moved into a tiny apartment in the poorest part of town, using up her small savings just to pay rent. Some nights she went to bed hungry, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But then Ana called with news that changed everything. Lucia was thriving. With her aunt, she was enrolled in a good school, making friends, and slowly healing from her grief. The little girl asked about Carmen constantly and wanted to visit. Even better, Ana had told other social workers about Carmen's courage in protecting Lucia. Word spread that there was a woman who would stand up for children even when it cost her everything. Slowly, Carmen began receiving calls from families who needed someone they could trust completely with their children. Not as a servant, but as a caregiver and protector. These families paid better and treated her with respect. A year later, Carmen opened a small childcare center with money she had saved and a loan from Ana. Parents brought their children to her, because they knew she would love them and fight for them if necessary. On the day she opened her center, Lucia and her aunt came to visit. Lucia ran straight into Carmen's arms, and Carmen realized that saving this one child had somehow saved her too. Are you happy now, Carmen? Lucia asked, just like she had that day in the Rivera house. Carmen looked around at her small but cheerful childcare center, filled with laughing children and grateful parents. She thought about how she had spent 12 years serving people who didn't value her, and how she now spent her days protecting children who needed her. Yes, sweetheart, Carmen said, hugging Lucia tight. I'm happier than I ever thought possible. Carmen had learned that real loyalty meant being faithful to what was right, not to what was easy. She had discovered that sometimes the greatest act of service was refusing to serve those who didn't deserve it. Most importantly, she had found out that standing up for someone else had taught her to stand up for herself. The woman who had once made herself invisible had become someone who couldn't be ignored. Carmen's rebellion had cost her the only security she had ever known, but it had given her something far more valuable. She had found her true purpose, and with it, she had found herself.